Thank you, Acting President. I rise to make a contribution to motion 791 on the Werribee by-election and thank Mr Mulholland for moving it. It raises a number of issues very close to our hearts, and then I realise it's being moved by the Liberal Party. I don't know how many motions we have raised about the West over the last 2 years: public transport, justice, services, the environment, multiculturalism, Western suburbs, Nazis, and with the possible exception of my learned and very respected colleague Mr Trong Lo, we've heard nary a peep of support from Liberal members. There are big issues in the West and in Werribee, but I'm afraid this motion smacks of pure political cynicism. The Teals have ripped you a new posterior vent in the Inner East, and you believe that a Dutton-inspired culture war will rally the working classes of the western and the southeastern suburbs to deliver some salvation. But I'm afraid I think you are dreaming. There is a general understanding across the West, that the Liberal Party does not believe that sentient life exists west of the Maribyrnong, or at least not until you get to Torquay. Mr Mulholland raised the question of the age and some sources there, so let's talk about the article from Chip Legrand recently, which starkly exposed the Liberal disconnection from the West. And if I might summarise Mr Legrand, in the second most multicultural place in Australia, you went for an old white Catholic real estate agent who lives in Essendon. Now, I'm sure Mr Murphy is a very nice man, but talk about not reading the room. Seriously, you had a potential candidate who could draw from across the Indian diaspora. That's 20% of that electorate, and you went for Mr Murphy. But then, of course, your 19-member administrative committee does not have a single member who actually lives west of the Maribyrnong, does it? So all of this sudden concern about the aspirations of the unappreciated residents of Werribee, let's be real, it's all crocodile tears. This motion is about embarrassing the Labor Party and shows scant sincerity for the West. So perhaps to help you shape the remainder of your campaign in the West, because there's still a few days to go, let's talk about some of the issues that really do matter. So first, let's talk about law and order. Yeah, that's a big one. Everyone, first and foremost, has a right to be safe in their own home or in public. But the Liberals keep bleating the same tired slogans and dog whistles. Get tough on crime, get more cops on the beat. An approach that simply doesn't work. And then there's this tired dog whistle about youth crime waves. Show me where simply having more police enforcing the law more vigorously has done anything to fundamentally improve public safety. So a couple of points. One, there is a shortage of police not just in Werribee, but also across Victoria and across Australia. So where are you going to get these police from? Secondly, the best way to keep young people out of trouble is to keep them engaged in their community and have them finish school and get a job. It's also much cheaper. It costs $6,000 a year to keep a young person in school, but it costs $7,700 a day to have that same kid down the road at the Cherry Creek Correction Centre. You could triple the spend on keeping youth engaged, supported and in school, and reduce crime and save money at the same time. On a subject close to my own heart, can I observe that Wyndham loves cannabis? On a warm night in late summer, you can walk down many a street in Werribee or Wyndham Vale and breathe in the delightful aroma of ripening homegrown weed. Yet we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on criminalising the simple possession of weed. This is not about commercial dealing or growing. We are simply talking about having it on you or growing a couple of plants in the backyard. What is criminal is the waste of taxes on policing, and I know from speaking with local police that they hate enforcing these laws. What's more, if you are a multicultural Aboriginal member of community, and that's a lot of folks in this electorate, you are 8 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession and half as likely to be offered diversion. So while we are on law and order, I would also say that the locals are very disappointed that they will soon host the second largest court complex in the state, but still have to travel to Sunshine or the city to access specialist court services because the government isn't proposing to adequately resource them. Secondly, traffic and public transport. The shocking state of traffic in Werribee is testament to the atrocious planning and underinvestment in roads and public transport by both major parties over many decades. Let's face it, the Western Rail Plan and the Western Bus Plan for the western suburbs is largely off the rails and must be reset, resourced and prioritised by this government. But improvements can be made right now, particularly to public transport. Fast, frequent and reliable buses connecting residents to major activity centres and train stations can be done almost immediately. The Better Buses campaign, which we have championed for 18 months, provides a rapid way to make major improvements. And one bus can take 50 cars off the road. So it has major benefits in terms of cost of living as well as environmental issues. And in the West, I'm talking about cost of living, it's worth remembering that the average household has a little under 3 cars per household. The motion refers to the suburban rail loop west. And can I say, look, honestly, I've talked to a lot of people about public transport over the last 2 years in the West, and no one's ever mentioned it. There is, however, a very strong feeling that there are tens of billions of dollars being dropped into a hole in the ground for a couple of train stations when people in the West would basically like a decent train service with decent buses that connect to them. In terms of housing, that's a big issue. The cost and availability of housing in the Werribee issue is much like it is across Melbourne. But there are some unique issues that arise from being the fastest growth corridor in Australia. We get a heap of complaints from people who have bought into new estates on the promise of a range of marvellous services, retail outlets and access to public transport, only to find that the developers have delivered little or nothing. One large estate in the West was promised public transport and a shopping centre and 5 years later has nothing to show for it. Another estate was promised an aquatic centre and they got a pond. They got a pond. Now, we have raised this repeatedly in this parliament and all we've got is the offer of one referral to the Minister, from a Minister to Consumer Affairs. So we will be looking to bring amendments to the parliament that will force developers to document the services they use in their sales pitch and make them enforceable. Fourthly, services. The provision and services and infrastructure in Werribee has profoundly failed to keep pace with its growth. On almost any indicator, the western suburbs are underfunded compared to the eastern suburbs. This is largely because the Labor Party takes it for granted, believing it to be a safe seat, and the Libs don't really get that anything matters west of the Maribyrnong. All we seek is the same level of investment in infrastructure and services as all those politically marginal seats in the eastern suburbs. To give but one example, swimming pools are chronically underprovided in the West, where temperatures can be 10 degrees higher than in the East. The City of Wyndham has just one aquatic and recreation centre for every 48,000 young people. That compares to one for every 5,000 young people in the City of Melbourne. And we can point to any number of other services that are in exactly the same position. I'll conclude with 2 points. Firstly, we know the West is the best, but it gets so much less. And the reality is that the government needs to recognise this, act on it, or 2026 will be an electoral disaster. Secondly, in terms of the motion from the opposition, you may have raised a few issues that are of concern to the people of Werribee, and some that frankly just aren't. But you offer nothing meaningful by way of positive change. You offer opportunistic criticisms and glib one-liners, but no solutions and no commitments to actually improve the lives of folks in the West. Accordingly, LCV will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.